Okay, so now we're going to look at, we're going to use Hayek 1945, Use of Knowledge in Society, basis of knowledge to look at California fires that are raging right now. And I have a uncle who lives in Northern California who has a vineyard, and he got evacuated, but grapes have so much water that grapes don't burn. The vineyard doesn't burn, but you can certainly smell the pot fields going up in smoke. So you have these things called utilities. Power, water, electricity. So these utilities are seen as natural monopolies. They're seen as natural monopolies, meaning that it makes no sense. And the reason for that is what's known as the last mile problem. Last mile problem. So this is kind of a little bit more advanced economics, but you can handle it. So it doesn't make sense to have open, free competition for electricity, water, and sewage. It doesn't make sense to have open competition for this because the last mile, you only need to run one electrical wire, one water pipe, and sewage. So these are known as natural monopolies because it doesn't make sense to run a bunch of infrastructure, applicable. There's high barriers to entry due to the high fixed cost and due to geographical limitations, the last mile problem. So this category of utilities, sometimes called public utilities, are highly regulated. So in California, the regulatory body is California Public Utilities Commission. So the California Public Utilities Commission gets their money from state legislature. So the commission tells the state legislature, oh, we're doing a great job. They're not telling them that these days. And then the state legislatures gives them money to fund themselves and to fund their bureaucrats and their technocrats and their scientists. And the more that they regulate, the more money they get. This is public choice economics. This can explain the growth of state incentives. So, at least in Northern California, the electrical provider is Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E. So, and then whatever other electrical providers are. I'm talking specifically about electricity right now. What other electrical providers there are in California. I just know about PG&E in Northern California. And so then they tell their regulator everything's great. And what in turn does the Public Utilities Commission give those they regulate? What's the trade-off? So in this case, what the, at least in the PG&E case, what they got was, what they get is guaranteed returns. So what happened a few years ago, there was a lot of fires in Northern California, and it turned out the reason, one of the main reasons, and this relates to residuals, because California Department of I don't know, Interior, state of California, didn't allow people to maintain, to have small burns, to burn away the brush. So they were not, private landowners weren't able to maintain their properties. So you had a lot of kindling ready to go up in flames. And then also there's a lot of publicly owned land. And I'm just talking about Northern California that I know most about. Publicly owned land, again, no residuals. So nobody has the incentive to maintain the land. And so the public utilities, in this case PG&E, are given a guaranteed return on equity. In other words, you invest and provide these public utilities, will guarantee your investors a certain percentage return on equity. Right? So now that the last I checked into this, so PG&E, do the fires get sued and they go bankrupt, and now they're negotiating in the bankruptcy procedures. The last I heard that they would be guaranteed 12% return on equity. If you know anything about that, about the stock markets, you know that 12% return on equity is very good. So considering when you have an economy that's growing at 2%, 12% return on equity is good. So PG&E goes bankrupt. They're negotiating to get this above normal profits as they're providing information that the utility commissions need. They can provide it to the legislators so that they can be funded. And the way it works in central banking, you actually have, I'll tell you another story. So on this, so they're guaranteed, no matter what happens, they get a guaranteed return on equity. They go bankrupt, and then they simply, because what happened is they weren't maintaining their lines. They weren't maintaining their transmission lines because they didn't have an incentive to invest, because they don't have economic incentives because they're getting a guaranteed return on equity no matter what. So they're not maintaining their lines, so that's what helps create fires in places that the forestry aren't maintained because there's no residuals. Does that make sense? So during the bankruptcy procedures, one of the things that is being talked about is, okay, we promise now to start maintaining our equipment better, but we get to pass along the increased costs to the ratepayers, the people that pay for the electricity. And this can explain why the price for electricity in California is so very high, because of this regulatory capture scenario. Anyone see that? Everyone see that? Everybody had any questions overseas or in the class on regulatory capture, asymmetrical information, social crisis, in this case, California fires. There's no residuals, there's no self-interest to make sure that things are working correctly. Yes.
So, this all is because of PG&E?
This is because the California Public Utilities Commission tells the state legislature, we know as much or more about electricity generation than the people actually in the business.
And then they raised taxes?
So they depend on information of those they regulate. So we then ask ourselves, what does the regulator give the regulated in return? In this case, they're giving them guaranteed return on equity and the ability to pass on higher costs to the consumers. So the whole idea that, I mean, I'm no scientist, but cable TV is also regulated like this somewhat, is seen as a natural monopoly. New Google, Amazon, Facebook are also now regulators want to determine them as natural monopolies because high costs, barriers to entry. So you just constantly get more and more regulation.
Costs.
And higher costs, less quality, more power for the regulator, more taxpayer-funded money to the regulators, more social crisis caused by, especially in the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft cases, censorship. What else were you going to say?
And that's keep this increasing stuff.
Yeah, this is how it works. This is how regulation works. I'll give you another example.
It seems like our country's going to fall apart.
Again, it's the slow decline of empire. Okay. Here's another example. So my dad in New Mexico had a meat packing company where we were a craft distributor, craft mayonnaise and cheeses and that, ketchups, for the state of New Mexico. And we would make hamburger patties and sell it to the drive-ins, like Sonic Drive-In. And we had provided a lot of restaurant supply stuff to restaurants, Mexican restaurants, and hospitals and things like that. So we were regulated by New Mexico equivalent of the Food and Drug Administration, right? The New Mexico equivalent of it. Or no, it was actually the FDA. It was actually a federal official. We had to have an office for this federal official in my dad's small factory. He had only employed maybe 20 people. The nicest office in the factory was for the federal government official who would come to check on the safety and the health of the product. And so my parents, the front office was here, and then here would be the parking lot. We had an alarm system so that whenever the FDA official would drive up in the car, the office manager would press the buzzer, bam, bam. So we know that the FDA guy is showing up. So we stop smoking, or whatever else. So that's how regulation works. That's the example. Another example of regulatory capture theory. Fatal conceit. It's impossible for the regulator to know as much as the people they regulate, so they get captured, and that leads to a social crisis. That's the California wildfire example.